Hi everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to wire wrap a donut. This is not done with craft wire, but beading wire, believe it or not. Now this is going to be wonderful to learn if you have a little bit of imagination, some technique under your belt, and of course some really great beading wire. If you are wondering about the materials that I'm going to be using for this video, you can check out the description for this video, and in there I've listed all the materials that I'm using and some links on where you can get them. I want to welcome you to my channel. My name is Nilay Patel. I'm the owner, designer, and educator here at SilverSilk and more. Before we get started with today's project, I want you guys to do two things. The first is I want you guys to destroy that subscribe button on my YouTube channel. And if you're looking for even more inspiration, you can follow my Instagram. There I've got a lot of pictures and some reels and some really fun content to look at if you're looking for even more inspiration on using SilverSilk. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's project. Alrighty, I have got some tools at my table, and these are the tools that I'm going to be using for this project. So let me go over them one by one because there's quite a few here that we're using. The first is just a really good pair of cutters, specifically for beading wire. So I've got two in mind that I like to use. I use my Lindstrom cutters for just about anything. They're very durable, and I've used them for really thick craft wire all the way to fine thread, and they've cut magically each and every time. So I highly recommend, if you can get your hands on a pair, to get them. I've also just got a standard pair of flush cutters from Zeron, and these are great for beading wire. So you can really pick and choose which one you want to use to cut your beading wire for today. Next is my trio that I love from Wubbers. The first is a good pair of chain nose pliers that really comes to a very delicate taper here at the end. Love these. They're great for gripping all kinds of things and really getting into some tight spaces because that tip is so narrow. And I would go ahead and say the same thing about my round nose pliers. I love how small they are toward the tip here. But they are as well from Wubbers and are great for loop making. And then I've got a pair of wide nose pliers. These are wonderful for all of my SilverSilk findings to crimp with. And I've dipped these in some Tool Magic, and this is going to help to prevent any sort of abrasion that happens whenever you're using the pliers on those findings. And it also gives you a really good grip on your findings. I used to use nylon jaw pliers, and I can remember findings would flip from one side of my pliers all the way to the other end of the room. And so those are just not fun to use. And so I highly recommend, if you do have a pair of even chain nose pliers, dip them in some Tool Magic, and you'll be surprised at how much easier crimping will be. So those are my tools. Oh, and of course my magical crimpers. This is going to be used for making lots of little crimps with soft flex crimp, 2x2 crimps, as well as on that beading wire, which is also from Softflex Company, which looks like this. I'm using the copper color, and I put roughly about 3 feet in the materials list, and so you can have plenty there to experiment with. And I recommend the medium size, which is really great if exposed, and if it's covered up with beads, it's also really good because you know it's going to be a very strong hold, whatever you crimp it to. And I highly recommend going with Softflex Company for all of your beading wire needs. Which brings me to my crimps. These are 2x2 copper colored crimps. I love these for two specific reasons. One is that they have double the wall thickness to other crimps from other companies. This is really good if you're wanting a very strong hold again, and to make sure that that crimp really sticks to your beading wire. So very important to look for that wall thickness. And the other part is that it's seamless. And so whenever you are using the magical crimpers, it's not going to burst or break as it's being crimped, since it's only one notch. And I'll demonstrate how to work with these pliers for you too, of course. So I recommend going with the Softflex line of crimps and beading wire. Again, just hand in hand. My favorite company to work with for beading wire needs and um, all those sort of supplies. So for my donut pendant, I'm of course going to need a donut. This is roughly about a 30 millimeter donut that I actually found at a bead and gem show that happened in here in Tulsa just not too long ago. And believe it or not, I actually got this for $1, which was like a steal of a deal. And I love the color, and I just thought, this beautiful yellow color is going to go really well with some sage. It's a color palette that I haven't really explored in my own stuff, and I think being that we're in summer weather right now, it just seemed like a perfect way to go. So, and I love this beautiful natural material as well of that stone look, especially against the crystals and faceted beads that I'm going to be using. So, grab yourself a donut. The edible kind is great too, by the way. I love edible donuts. You need some flat mesh. If you are not familiar with what flat mesh is, it's a 6-needle weave that comes out as a hollow sleeve and then goes through another apparatus that flattens it out of the machine. And so you get this beautiful, really textural chain that's so intricate and detailed when you look up close, and yet it's so strong and supple to work with. And so I love this olive green color, especially against this pop of yellow. It's just going to be dynamite. So I'm going to set that aside. We're going to be using some of that. And the flat mesh comes in a 5-foot spool, so you got plenty to work with. If you wanted to make one donut pendant, you can. You can make 3 or 4 of them if you want. There's a lot to work with. You will need some flat mesh crimps. These are perfect for going with the flat mesh and crimping the ends for a very professional look. They have my little SilverSilk stamp on it, and they've also got little teeth on the inside, so whenever you smash it down with your flat nose pliers, and I do say smash in the sense of smashing it because if it's covered in the tool magic, you have no problems or nothing to worry about. But it's just that easy. You don't need any other special glues or anything to make this work. So you just put in the flat mesh and you crimp it and call it good. So you will need a total of 3 of these crimps, I believe. And lucky that our packaging comes with 4 crimps to work with. And so if you do mess one up, you've got one extra there to have at the end of it all in case you need it. And then let's see, I've got some crystals. Well, these are, I guess, more or less just glass beads. I shouldn't say crystals quite in its purest form. But these are 5 millimeter just faceted glass beads in that sage color that I told you about. And again, just a perfect complement to the donut. And especially if you're using yellows, I know those can be a little bit intimidating of a color palette. And so, just some options here to work with are those really mossy greens with the yellows, and it helps to kind of even and temper everything down to that earth tone. So let's get started. The first thing I want to do is go ahead and wrap my donut, actually, because that's the most intricate part of this whole project. And then we're going to do our little tassel here at the end. So let me grab my beading wire. Now, I already went ahead and made a loop at one end. And I'm starting with roughly about 2 feet here, probably a little bit more on this because I just took it right off the spool. But you want to start with, go ahead and making a little loop here at the end and just having a little bit of tail wire sticking out. We're going to trim this off actually once we crimp it. But you just string your crimp right on twice and then loop it around. So now you're all ready to crimp. And you want your loop to be somewhat petite here. So this is probably about 2 millimeters of a loop. And this is what's going to attach our necklace rope to our pendant. So the idea here is that since this is a single notch crimp plier, you want to stick it into that singular notch and then make sure that it's really in there though, and that it's not sticking out on one side because then that will mess up the entire crimping process. So once it's in there and you flatten it, it becomes sort of a little box with pinched corners. I know it might be a little bit hard to see since it's a smaller view here, but you could definitely pause this video and replay it as many times as you want. But once you get that box shape with the pinched corners there, you turn it on its side and then you just kind of pinch it again. And then you just take it into quarter turns and continue to use your pliers and press it all together. The idea here is that it compresses, the crimp compresses into a little bead that is just nice and clean and very secure. So once you've done that, at this point, you can actually trim off that little tail thread of beading wire, and you're ready to go ahead and string on your beads. So the first thing I'm going to do is make my crimp, and then the next thing I'm going to do is actually string on one of my 5mm crystals here. And what I'm going to do is just sort of line it up with my donut, and I'm going to go through the donut. And you can also work with any size donut. You don't have to be limited to this 30mm donut. Imagine a larger donut with even the Softflex fine wire and using seed beads maybe. For this project, you could really make this as versatile as you want to. And I'm going to string up through that crystal bead, or the glass bead. I need to stop saying crystal because it's not really a crystal. So basically, I've just looped it back up through that glass bead, and I'm ready to actually put on another bead. Okay. And I'm actually going to do 2 beads because I want one to be in the center, and then the next bead here is going to be the one that I loop up through again. So once I've got 2 of these glass beads on, I'm going to kind of just put my thumb down on that beading wire, go through the donut again. Okay, and you want to make sure that you do untangle this as you go. Sometimes it'll want to curl up on you there. But once you do, it's nice. And then you just go back up through that bead again. And what you'll notice now is that all of this starts to stay in place just beautifully. And you start to get these really great lines in your beadwork that look like wire wrapping, but it's not really wire. I mean, unless you count beading wire, I suppose. Okay, I'm going to string 2 more beads on. I'm going to do this for a total of 6 times. So I'm going to have 5 beads at the top here that sort of stick up. Okay, go through the donut. And then I'm going to go through that glass bead. There we go. Pretty cool, right? See how easy and fast it works up? And I don't have to worry about any craft wire kinks. I don't have to worry about making sure that everything is precise and staying linear because it's string and because it's being stretched. It's already going to hold its form and its shape. So I think Softflex wire is pretty smart stuff. It's a wonderful cable. And a really good complement to SilverSilk too. I just love figuring out ways that I can use it in my personal beadwork. And tutorials, of course. Okay, through the donuts. And then up through that glass bead. You want to make sure that that bead hole is a pretty good size. I will say any of the 16-inch strands that come in most bead stores or are distributed through most bead stores have a pretty decent sized hole, so you can get, you know, a couple of strands at least to go into that bead. Okay, so here I'm approaching my 6th strand, my 6th loop here. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to come out through that side bead there. And now I need to just complete another loop on this end to complete my wire work there. So I am gonna grab a crimp. And one thing I did notice is that wall thickness on these are pretty good, pretty thick. So we're gonna see if we can pass my beading wire through here pretty efficiently. Sometimes it takes a little bit of finagling, but it is possible. So let's do this. It's like it kind of goes in part ways and then it stops. Sometimes you can cut your beading wire at an angle and that'll help. Or if that doesn't always work, you can always fish through your crimps and find one that might have a slightly larger hole. Oh, you know what? And I ended up making my little wire end there dull. You see what I mean by trimming it at an angle? Think of it like a flower cutting. Whenever you cut flowers, you want to make sure that the water is absorbed through the stem pretty efficiently. So you cut your flowers at an angle, and that seems to help. Okay, I'm going to use my pliers since my fingers are quite large here. There we go. It is working through pretty good. As you can see there. Sometimes it's just hard to grip it. It's that delicate and tiny. So you rely on your pliers, right? Okay, so now you just kind of push everything down and you want to make sure that that loop is the right size or the same size as your previous loop and that everything is staying, of course, nice and tight. Okay, I pulled it just enough, as you can see, that that mirrors what I did earlier. So now I'm going to grab my crimpers and again, just pushing it as hard as I can the first time, making sure that I get a nice square shape with pinched corners. Once I've done that, I can insert it back in and just take it in quarter turns while pressing. Perfect. I generally tug on this just to make sure that it's not going to come out or anything. And then once you feel good about it, you can absolutely just trim that right off. And if you need to do a little bit of adjusting or tightening or kind of pulling some of these to make sure that everything is, you know, looking correct, then you can. But this looks really good. And see how quickly it worked up there? Pretty cool. So now I can work on the bottom part of this pendant. So I'm going to grab my green flat mesh. And you know what? I actually didn't get an extra crimp out. So let me do that real quick. My supply bag here. Because we'll need that for the bottom part of this. There we go. I had all my other crimps set out here and forgot my little one there. So I just need a little bit here to work with, probably about 4 to 5 millimeters tops. And then, of course, you could just trim the rest off there. I want my crimp to be fairly tight against that donut. So whenever you're crimping, the same thing applies whenever you do this with pearlesque or capture chain. You want to make sure to clear and just to condition your knitted wire before you put it in any of the findings. What that means is that you just trim it and then shake out any of those little wire fuzzies that you could see have fallen all over my little whiteboard here. These tend to get in the way of crimping, and so you just can pluck them right out as you are working with it. And when everything looks nice and clear, which it does now, you are ready to crimp. So I just kind of press on the ends there a little bit to kind of get it tapered. and ready to go, and then you can insert it into your crimp. I want to have my SilverSilk logo stick face up, so that looks good to me. Okay, and then you can just simply press. And again, because it's a brass interior, it's going to be a very strong hold and very, very difficult to pry apart at this point. So you want to make sure that you get this crimp right the first time. But this looks excellent. I'm just going to move those little fuzzies off to the side there. And now I'm basically ready to wrap up the rest of this. So at the bottom, I use the same crimping method to create my tassel. So as you can see, I just made a loop at one end. I strung on 10 of those little beads, and then I just made another loop at the end and then just trimmed all of it off after I made my little crimp there. And so you do this a total of 5 or 6 times. Here I just have a tassel of 5 pieces here, and I've attached them all to a jump ring. So then I can take my jump ring and grab my chain nose pliers here and attach that right to the bottom, and this gives me my brilliant little tassel. Perfect. And then at the top here, I went ahead and attached my clasp. And for me, this is going to be a shorter necklace. And so what I've measured here is probably closer to about 9 to 10 inches on both strands of flat mesh, which is why I said earlier that you can have a lot of necklaces made with this much flat mesh, the full 5-foot spool. It's because you're not using very much for this project, and yet it's still making a very dynamic statement design. So having cut 10 inches for each side, I went ahead and crimped where my clasp goes. So I'm going to crimp this other end and show you guys how to attach it all together. So again, my wire had been already preconditioned, so I'm just going to stick it back into my finding there, my flat mesh crimp. And then I'm going to go with my pliers and press. Those little teeth will catch into the knits of that wire. And you want to make sure that the seam is closed on both sides. Okay, same thing here. Insert it in as much as you can. Oop, I'm actually right-handed, so I'm going to go this side. And one thing you may also pay attention to is the side that the logo is facing on both ends. I about crimped it on the wrong side here, so I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to making sure that it is consistent. So this will be logo side up. Perfect. And then I'm going to just crimp this. Whoops. You can actually grasp it with your pliers first and then insert with your other hand and then crimp. Yeah, that's perfect. So now I can use my jump rings to attach that to my donut pendant. Just like that with ease. And boom. We have got ourselves a very cool, stylish necklace that we made in minutes. Now, you guys will be probably crimping your tassel together, so I kind of did a little bit of the work ahead of time. But I wanted you to understand the knitting or the weaving process in this design, and actually how it does complement the knits of my flat mesh in looking at it again. So I hope you guys understood that, and we'll give it a try. So I want to thank you guys for joining me this evening for this wonderful tutorial. I had a really good time showing you my secrets and technique on how to make this design. And if you're looking for even more, you can check out my entire giant library that I have on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel while you're there and show the channel some love by commenting on this video. And Also, you'll find a giant library of tutorials that I've done with the different lines of SilverSilk that I carry. You can also check out my Instagram where I have a ton of different posts, different reels, different inspiration pieces, all kinds of goodies on there too, and a great place to find lots of ideas. So, again, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I cannot wait to see you next time for our next Tuesday tutorial for SilverSilk and more. And I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and I love you so much. Mwah!